So, fantastic presentations. We've got Hans back up on stage, who was talking about citizen science, evidence and trust. Lisa, who was talking about the 25-year plan, environment indicators. Robbie, who talked us through the Public Health England interests in environmental monitoring. Rob Wood, who gave us that fantastic example piece about fracking, and Chris, who gave us the fantastic insight into the woodland monitoring and the woodland trust. I'm going to suggest we leap straight into questions. The theme here is, are we meeting the UK's environmental evidence needs? So if you have questions on that theme, that would be fantastic, or questions specifically to our panel members. Lady on the right here.
Environmental evidence needs. Small number of people, large proportion of land. How are we engaging the agricultural community?
Right, fascinating question. Anyone keen to pick that one up?
I would do it, but not on the basis of the countryside survey. I am doing other work with farmers outside of countryside survey. But I think they are themselves, a set of them, much more interested in monitoring what's going on their land. A lot of them soil sample. They have to actually under the five-yearly water regulations. They're supposed to. So they should be getting that data. But I think certainly with the farmers that I'm working with, there is more acknowledgement that they need to monitor their soil, but also other aspects of their holdings. But yeah, that needs to be spread across a wider population of farmers, and it can include soil sampling. But they can be a difficult community to engage with, I think. But they need to see that it's beneficial for them. What's in it for them? How is the measuring going to affect their performance going forward? I think that they are coming on board more and more.
If I can pick that one up as well. As I said, one of my other hats on is I'm leading on crops for SECA, the crop sector plan. Farmers, it's essential, and they know that very well themselves, that they need to understand what's happening on their farm to make the right business decisions. But if you go back again to why are you monitoring, is to make the right decisions. Farmers do that. So they understand where to apply manure, how much manure to apply. Yes, we can help them move on, but they're actually monitoring an awful lot there. If you look at an awful lot of the higher value crops, such as the potatoes and the carrots, then you see that increasingly there is an awful lot of monitoring done by the farmers themselves in terms of the amount of irrigation water, where, when and how. And you see satellite imagery being used and drone information being used to apply the right amount of irrigation material and water at the right location at the right time, because it costs money to pump the water there. So there's a really good business rationale for that. You see now that satellite imagery and drone information is being used to target pesticide application within fields and to individual regions within fields. And you see that fertilizer application is being used. And between years, and that's not only information of the environment that's being gained to help business processes, but also during harvesting. Most modern harvesting machinery measure the amount of crop being harvested per unit area. That is measured by the combined harvesters, by the potato harvesters and by the sugar beet harvesters. So these people know very well through that where the right fields and what that field knows. So I don't think we should go and measure anymore. I think we should start sharing that data and making maximum use of that data.
Fabulous, thank you. Other questions from the floor? There's one over here.
Catherine Dargan, James UC. I wonder if the panel have any suggestions on how we can maintain a strong UK environmental perspective as environmental policy becomes more devolved across the countries?
Right, the big challenge.
I suppose from my perspective, the UKEOF is a very good forum to enable that. We sort of work with the Natural Capital Working Group, and that's very definitely been one where the countries are going off and doing their own thing in their own way. And it really does help to sit together in a room and say, well, this is the way we're doing it. Why are you doing it that way? And why are you doing it? Because some people aren't doing it at all. Other countries are doing it, but they are doing it in a very different way. You can't say natural capital in Wales because they don't believe in it. So it's nature's resources. So it's really important, I think, and I think that UKEOF really does provide that. And I don't think there is an awful lot else out there, unless anyone can put me right, to enable that collaboration across countries. But I think it really does. It's really important because we share our land boundaries in most cases. We're not so far away. We manage our land very similarly. It would really help to work together on those things.
Yes, please.
Well, obviously some of the big environmental NGOs like Woodland Trust and RSPB are UK organisations, so I think that challenge is certainly one that we're dealing with, on a daily basis, is how we look environment, and that was one of the reasons for doing the state of the UK's woods and trees, is to try and bring that data together at that level, so that we can look at the UK and what's happening there, because obviously nature doesn't really care about those sort of boundaries, so yeah, that's one of the things that we're doing.
I mean, I think I was going to say the same thing as a British Geological Survey. The sort of clue is in the name, and we work very closely with the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland, so we don't see the boundaries between the UK nations. And we work with all of the devolved governments and their agencies in a variety of ways. What we try to do is use our research in a consistent way, and the products that we generate, are generally seamless across those boundaries.
Got to be careful here. So I think it's really important to have organisations like the UKEOF whereby we can learn from each other, and I think that's what we do. And there are others parallel to that, and I think the NGOs are really important in there just to keep that perspective across the UK. At the same time, we need to realise that the pressures and the agendas can be different across countries. So yes, it really is important that we learn and share as much as we can, because we can learn from each other. But there is also different pressures. The pressures that there are in the north of Scotland are really, really, really different than in the centre from London. So if we are London-centric based in our monitoring, that we need to be really careful, that we might not understand what's really important in Scotland up north, and especially at this moment in time whereby carbon loss reduction and carbon sequestration is becoming more and more important. You see that, for example, you might want to go for knowledge gathering, which is really focused towards those areas where you can have the quickest sequestration. So I think we should learn from each other, but also understand that there are different pressures acting.
Question at the front here.
I was wondering how much the panel is aware of the phenomenon of the backfire effect. This is where, in the face of abundant evidence, this is particularly in the context of the climate emergency, it doesn't change people's attitudes, and in fact they become more entrenched in the beliefs that they already had.
Right, response to the crisis.
Quite happy to pick the one up. Whilst I'm talking here anyway. I think it's very clear, and I thought that's what I was trying to get across in the keynote just after lunch, is that people need to feel that the knowledge is theirs. Otherwise, you will not act on it, especially in a landscape whereby there is less trust in government institutes, and where the zone of trust is receding to people that you know. So in that light, it's crucial not to tell people. And I think we will end a risk at people gathered around the table here in an organisation like this, is that we're developing knowledge and we tell the people what to do. And I think there is citizen science, as I showed, can create a real difference there. So I don't think it's about gathering more knowledge. I think it's gathering knowledge together with people that enables people to make the right decisions in their own livelihoods. At the same time, we need to manage the environmental pressures in the landscape with big businesses. So we need to have the right evidence on the table as well to manage that in the right way. So it's creating that balance between enabling people to make the right decisions for themselves in their own environment. Crucial within there is that the people are involved in the setting up, the acquiring and the analysis of that evidence, and don't give them only the end bit and tell them to be part of it. If you want behaviour change, you need to go through that whole sequence from the beginning. It's very clear evidence, especially coming from the NGOs. So Yes, we need to acquire more evidence for specific things, but if we want people to change, we need to make them part of the journey, and don't tell them the results at the end.
Yeah. Any other responses? Just on that, I'd just like to just come back to that Noticing Nature report that I mentioned earlier that was published by the National Trust today, with the University of Derby involved as well. As I said, they did a couple of studies. One was asking people and one was actually carrying out activities with people, and found out that a lot of young people and adults are not having those moments of engagement with nature. It's just not part of their lives at all. What they found for the people who did, and this won't be news to anybody, is that it is associated with increase in well-being and with pro-nature behaviour. And I think that's the other route that we can pursue with it. So just seeing where are those links and where does that knock on into other behavioural changes.
Yeah, just to add to that, we run a Trees for Schools project where we do tree packs and plant in school grounds, and we've done a study on looking at what are the benefits of that for the kids that plant trees, and that they've shown that actually unbelievably their behaviour in classroom improves after they've done the tree planting, and that's happened in there's lots of different evidence around that, so it's quite amazing really. So I think it's about people feeling like they're making a difference and they understand why they're planting a tree, and it's like you said, it's engaging people from the start and showing that they can actually, there's something physical that they can do that will make a difference.
Okay, another question at the front here. Thank you.
It's just a very short comment on that one. I'm Henry McGhee from Curating Tomorrow. My background's working in museums and where you're working with communication all the time. And I came across this piece of work by an American sociologist who's unfortunately passed away now. Based on huge surveys in the US in the 1970s, that only 3% of people think in a primarily scientific way. So whereas museums would typically talk about nature in a scientific way, you're instantly cutting out 97% of people. It's not to say that science isn't important, because as we know it really is. It's just not necessarily the entry point.
Yeah, really useful comment. Thank you.
I think almost everybody on this panel and this morning's panel said that they need better access to our own data. We need to be able to share data better amongst ourselves. Somebody this morning also mentioned that the solution to that was not some huge data centre sitting somewhere. How would you like data? How do you want it provided to you? How do you want to be able to search for it, discover it, and access it and use it?
Perhaps we could have one quick comment from each person on that one, because I bet everyone's got a lot to say. Go on, Hans.
I think a quick comment from an EPA is that we are starting to think about changing the accessing of our own data and external data into a search-based and search-oriented data. So it's more a Google search than knowing which data set to assess. So if I want to know about if I've got a query, or if a member of the public is involved in a planning decision around a certain particular area, they can put that area in there or that query in there, and that brings all the data up rather than needing to know where all the data is. So I don't think it's more data, it needs to be mineable.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. I think it's about data interpretation. For example, the National Biodiversity Network records, amazing database full of species data, but it's being able to analyse that from the things you draw out, what's important within that. So that would make a real difference to Woodland Trust anyway.
So first of all, good metadata, so we know what you've got and what it means, what its characteristics are. We've got a responsibility to make sure we only ask for what we need. I'm talking as a researcher here, it's easy to ask you for everything, which doesn't help. So I think it's about understanding what data are available and then having a targeted request on that.
I guess it's also understanding the limitations of the data that you have as well from the start, because you can apply the data in different ways. We can map hazards and overlay that with disease, but without understanding the exposure of it, it doesn't really assist in a way. So it's just understanding how the data is gathered and what limitations are associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, I have some reservations here because I know that some of our data is not available because of confidentiality, and I know the same will be true for Welsh Government. And so you have to be, you know, there are limitations we have to think about, but there are still ways. I mean, all the CS data is available, but not necessarily the spatial accuracy, because those landowners would take part in the survey if you then release their details to everybody. So I think, I agree with everybody else that broadly, but the metadata is really the most important thing because you need to know what that data says.
But that's the difficult bit and that's the boring bit. But that's the bit we really need. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we've got time for perhaps 2 more questions.
I think one of the challenges is, with data, with citizen science, is understanding the actual costs. Could the panel comment on how they incorporate that sort of real-world economics and volunteering time, which isn't free for the volunteer particularly, into their planning?
How do we find the cost for the not free activities?
We've had to be very explicit on the costs of countryside survey and land cover mapping, and yet I agree that sometimes there are quite hidden costs in other forms of data collection, and I think it's we did write a paper on the use of CS data versus the use of EO data for bird monitoring, and the journal kept saying, give us them figures. But actually it's very difficult to give those figures of the satellite data and the time it costs to process that data, and it's tricky. I can see that it's very important, but it means that those costs need to be explicit in all the monitoring that goes on so that we do know, we can compare them and make decisions about what the most effective way to go with.
Well, just one example is the data that I spoke about for the resurvey of the 130 ancient woodlands. We did an appeal to our members over Christmas in their membership magazine for that, and raised about a third of the cost of the whole project from that appeal. We didn't think it would be a particularly sexy project for people to, but actually everyone's really interested in looking at ancient woodlands and how they're changing. So I was quite surprised and pleasantly surprised about that.
Yeah, fabulous.
I think we need to be absolutely open and honest as citizen science, not free data. Yeah, and if you go through the guidances and the information that we've got, the citizen science working group is very clear around that. But it creates a really valuable data set and information, not only the data, but also the whole process and the environment engagement. And how you're going to put in an an economic value on that, I'm not sure. So the economic argument is important, but there is so much added value in the citizen information that it's very difficult to monetize. So I'm slightly nervous about only putting pound signs on all this information, because that presupposes a unilateral data stream, and this is not. This is bilateral. This is two directional.
Thank you. That seems like a good place to finish, actually, because to me that was a really nice plug for yet another UKEOF fantastic resource, which I know is available on the website. There was quite a lot of work done a few years ago, particularly on the citizen science side, looking at costs and benefits and looking beyond financial costs and benefits as well. And there's some fabulous reports and things that can help people who are trying to work through these issues, all available on the website, free of charge. Thank you so much, UKEOF.
So what I want to do is a couple of things. One is just to kind of summarise what I've kind of heard from the various conversations, both this morning and this afternoon. And then it'd be good just to get a little bit of feedback around that. Are there things that you think, no, actually you've missed that as well? What I would say before I do that is that, we will, as the EOF management group, actually spend time, kind of digesting everything that we've heard. And the intention is really, having done that, is to both produce a summary of today, but also then look at how we shape a UK monitoring strategy as well. And so there will be opportunities for you to feed into this as we go through, I promise. So I guess my starting point, and in my introduction this morning, I did describe how UKEOF brings together people from the kind of regulatory policy area, along with people involved with research, but also probably what's come through very, very strongly today is actually the role that citizens can and should play in that as well. I felt also there was a slight kind of point, or a bit of a tension this morning start to emerge between the kind of long-term, broad-scale activity, and then how do you match that with some of the more kind of focused and targeted work. So the idea of how do you take information from satellites and combine that with good data collected on the ground by someone with a pair of wellies on as well. And I think what came through really strongly was it's not an either or, it never can be. It's actually one of the things we've got to work on is how do those 2-3 different aspects all work together as well. I don't think for a second that ecologists are redundant either now or ever will be in the future as well. I think that, you know, people with that kind of expertise are exactly the kind of skills that we're going to need to really make sense of Earth observation data. My nightmare scenario is we put all the data into some kind of black box and out pops an answer that nobody recognises as well. So, you know, I think there's a huge amount to be said for having that really intelligent interpretation at all stages. We also touched quite a lot around innovation. So again, we talked about Earth observation, but also things like DNA, we touched on at various points as well. We have already done quite a lot of work within the UKEOF context around that as well. But it feels like, you know, in terms of how we really evolve and develop, I think that's going to be a really strong focus for any kind of strategic look. Is not are we measuring the right things today, but are we measuring the right things for the future as well? And also I felt from certainly Robbie and Rob's talks this afternoon, I think the real strength of having good baseline data to inform that was absolutely imperative, but also recognising this doesn't happen. You can't just say we need this and it will be producing next week. It's quite a long lead time that's required and quite a lot of forethought to put into actually gathering that as well. So the more that we can do as a community to kind of identify those needs early is going to be absolutely essential as well. And then just a couple of other points. One of the things that ran through the whole day was really how we engage with others. So citizen science being one example of that. But actually this idea of how do we have, you know, short, compelling pieces, whether it's infographics or short narratives that we actually share with people around the benefits, the value of monitoring as well, and almost to try and encapsulate all the different kinds of monitoring that we've talked about in a kind of simple way. I mean, that is, in my head, that is very, very difficult, but it is something I think we spend quite a lot of time to actually to do that. You know, because what I said at the beginning this morning was this can feel a bit like a Cinderella exercise. You know, nobody cares about monitoring until it's not there, and I think we need to really work hard to make sure that that case is well understood from the outset and ongoing as well. And there was I thought a really powerful point I think Christine made earlier on today around actually maybe we need to think about monitoring as a ship, you know, rather than looking at individual bits of it. How do you actually, you know, make the case for something as the whole, the totality as well, which is something I think we need to really think about. And then we touched on Brexit at various points. You know, I think as a UK organisation, we do need to absolutely recognise that. We're not complacent about that at all. We do try and do a lot of work to make sure we are relevant to the whole of the UK. But I think there was an discussion earlier on around recognising that there will be different aspirations for different parts of the UK. But also, I'd add to that, I think even we're seeing within England, you know, regional differences emerging as well. So I think we need to be very attuned to that as well. This is not ever going to be a one-size-fits-all. So I think that's something we need to really, really work on very hard as well. And then finally, one of the other things that's come through a lot is actually, you know, citizen science, great way of engaging people and actually getting data, but it's not free. You know, if you march people at the top of the hill to work on citizen science and don't give them any support, don't give them any feedback as well, actually probably that's the worst thing that they could actually do as well. So some really good lessons there around that we need to really reflect on and think about. So those were the kind of the main points that had come out. Any particular things that people say, I don't agree with that, or, you know, actually something else, a big gaping hole that you think I've missed as I've gone through trying to capture that?
I'm just curious about, you mentioned how the UKEOF is bringing various groups together, including decision makers. Is there any scope within this to ask for funding? Because that's what's underpinning all of this and stopping all of us doing that. Is there, in the new policies coming through, is there any leverage to say, you've got to give us some money to do this?
So we, as a kind of a framework, we individual organisations, if you like, are responsible for their monitoring and if you like, making bids for funding, as things stand at the moment. I think as we move forward, which is why I was quite attracted to the idea of a ship, a research capability, I think we do need to actually think more clearly around actually how do you stitch those together to actually say this is the overall requirement there as well. I have no idea how the governance would work for that as well, but I think, if that's something we think is worth looking at, then I think it's something we should take forward. So, yeah. Do you want to add to that?
You knew I was going to say something. I can't keep my mouth shut. Engagement, absolutely agree with what you said. As a sum up, I think I would like to push the word engagement further. I would like to call it empowerment, because the data should not only empower the regulatory agencies and the UK and the institutions to make decisions, but it should empower not only the citizens but also the businesses, for example, including the farmers, to make the right decisions. So it goes further than engagement, it's empowering. And that ties so nicely with the governmental agendas about local empowerment, local decision making. So I think it goes further than engagement.
Thank you. Just on the farm data, I do wonder, because farm data is incredibly valuable, it's very difficult to get hold of because it's business data as well. So I wonder, do we need something like NHS Digital for that sort of agricultural data so that it can really be used for public good, but in a responsible way?
I guess the reason I'm hesitating is it sounds like a sensible idea. I think the main issue, as you say, is business data, so there is also that commercial confidentiality aspect as well. I mean, it would be good maybe to pick it up offline as to how that could work as well. I think there was a point that was made earlier on, I think Rob maybe made it, around we need to understand, I think it was Lisa, we need to understand what those limits are, and so we need to protect people's privacy as well, but any way we can overcome that and make the data not just more easily accessible in terms of getting hold of it, but also then, I think the other point that was made earlier on was actually then easier for people to actually understand as well, I think is something we need to take forward and have a look at.